Hello, welcome to this training on innovative practice using Microsoft's tools. I'm Andrew Henderson and I'm the lead practitioner digital over at the college. I'm also the director of music there. Mike Gibson asked me to come over to SMH today to talk through some of the innovations that we're looking at the college during this year and to talk you through our EdTech journey over at the college so far. So once I've done that, I will talk to you about assignments, which we're going to roll out as a matter of policy and good practice across all playrooms in the college this year, and the rich content and data analysis using grades and insights that enables. Then there's a few other sort of shorter bits that I'll talk you through at the end. There are also in the college version of this training, there's also some practicalities to do with our start of year routines, which I won't bore you with, which is why there's a separate SMH version of the training and of this video, but I'm sure Mike will have some SMH practicalities for you. So back in 2017, we took the decision in the college that we were going to remove written homework diaries from pupils, and instead of them being responsible for copying down the homework into their diaries, we were going to set it on Firefly so that they could log into a single central place, find out what tasks there were, also have lots of resources to support them in their tasks, and even schemes of work for some subjects were on Firefly. And it meant that students had one place to go to find out what they had to do that night for studies or over the coming week if there are a couple of longer projects. And it's fair to say that there was an opinion that pupils should be taking responsibility for writing that down themselves, especially in higher line, perhaps. The judgment that we came to in the end was that actually this is how we're enabling them to take responsibility. It also saves a lot of teacher time. Anything that we introduce at the college has to do one of two things, or preferably both. The first thing is reduce teacher workload. The second thing is improve the student experience, improve the quality of education. And I've mentioned them in that order, not for any particular reason, but it does have to do at least one of those two things, and preferably both. And as a former Year 7 tutor in a previous life, I know only too well that by and large, pupils do not write down the homework accurately. And if they do write down every single word that was on the board or that the teacher dictated, it doesn't mean they understood every single word that was on the board or the teacher dictated. And all of those conversations are now cut out, or most of them, because the pupil has chance to read it instead of writing it down, to think about it instead of slavishly copying it. It's very, very powerful, I believe. Then, of course, we had the pandemic. Who could forget that, being online? And we've kept some of the learnings from that. We certainly at the college, we now have online subject consultations because we've been able to engage with a much bigger percentage of our international parents than we ever could in person. We never actually offered an alternative formally to parents who couldn't make it. I don't know what the percentage attendance figures were pre-2020, but it's now above 80% for every playroom for the most recent year of subject consultations. I don't think it was ever that high. But of course, we are going back to some forms of in-person, face-to-face, get people in the building activity as well. Over the pandemic, of course, every pupil had a device that they were working from. With varying degrees of appropriateness, and sometimes it was a parent's work laptop that might be being shared. But over at the college in September 2020, we felt able to expect every pupil to bring a device with them. Now in practice, especially higher up the school, they were already doing this because there were so many more pupils than there were computers available during studies time for boarders to use. Anyway, so the vast majority already had access to some sort of device, but we expected them to take it to the lessons as well, and to be able to use it for when, for example, all of syntax went into lockdown for 10 days. Then in 2021, for a number of reasons, we introduced the standard device across the whole of the college and indeed much of SMH as well. And having one device makes it much easier for the IT tech support team to administer, because apart from anything else, if the screen is broken, they now know how to fix the screens. They just follow the same process rather than having 20 or 30 different models to look at. But also because, particularly over at the college, those one-to-one devices that people have brought with them were by and large MacBooks. And you can't write on a MacBook. And some of the others were iPads. And yes, you can write on an iPad, but there's quite a lot of the specialist software, things like loggers for physics, mapping software for geography, and initially music typesetting software for GCSE and A-level music that you couldn't use on an iPad. In fact, just after we bought them, the music one was sold, but the others were not. And so iPad's not necessarily the way to go. And having got everybody on the same device in 21 to 22, now the project for us at the college in 22, 23 is to take Firefly offline, basically. The resources element of Firefly, where people could go in and find their past papers rather than having to be giving them, or could go in and find worksheets that they'd lost and see them online, or to find the videos that teachers had alluded to in the lesson or being shown, but not given the link to. That's been replaced really by OneNote and Teams. The last thing is the tasks, and we could have introduced it last year or even the year before, but we chose not to simply because it wasn't ready. There was more work for Microsoft to do on it. They've now done that, so we're rolling it out, and there's even been some developments over this summer holiday. So Firefly for us will go over at the college. I know it was never in use at SMH, but it also means by going to solely being based in Teams, there's the possibility of it being a cross-campus solution, which Firefly never was. So this is our major focus for this term here at the college, is using assignments. So this is our policy. All studies must be set on assignments. It not being set in assignments is a reasonable excuse for a pupil not to have done it, because our vision is that they will log on to Teams, they'll click on assignments, they'll see what work they've got to do and do it pretty much in order of the date that it's due. Obviously paying attention to things that might take several sessions of work. That's where they take responsibility, is by thinking about the order they do things in, not by writing it down themselves in longhand. So we did some in-person and some video training in June, which covered the practicalities of that. You can have the video to that. Also, the in-person training was run by Mel Walsh, who I know comes over to SMH. So she's an excellent guru for you over there for the basics of, click here, press this, type this here, here's how dates work. You can probably work it out for yourselves. But I know that a lot of people like to see the steps so they know they're not going to break it first time out. Totally understand that. The best way to work with assignments, if we're thinking aspirationally here, is to have as much student work as possible based in OneNote, because the integration is very, very powerful. So you can just go in and in assignments you can write down what the students have got to do, and it can be look at page 43 of the textbook and copy the diagram into your orange exercise book. Assignments will cope with that, no problem, but some of the more advanced features which might actually help your workload and make the work more engaging for pupils, it involve it being held in OneNote. Now over at the college there are departments which use OneNote totally exclusively now. And there are departments which use it for most of the work or for all except one type of work. And there are some who use it very little, to be frank. That we have done quite a bit of training on this, but today I'm talking about broadly principles with some sort of little flashes of ideas that might spark you to go and experiment, rather than saying this is how you should do it, click here in this order and everything will be fine. And broadly speaking, the principle of OneNote is really, really simple. Instead of having a folder with dividers in, or a book that's divided into the sections by the topic, you have it on screen instead. It's actually not more complicated than that, really, conceptually, OneNote. It's just that rather than it being a book, which you stick some worksheets in, it's actually a digital book where you can have images, you can have the child drawing on a diagram that you've pasted in, but maybe recording themselves drawing on it, or speaking something in a foreign language instead of writing it down, or doing a video of them playing their musical instrument or whatever it might be. It's all rich content. You could set a YouTube video of you talking as the question, and a video of them answering the question could be the answer. You know, it opens up a lot of ways of answering questions, a lot of ways of communicating, but actually the relationship is still fundamentally they're going to do some work and put it in their folder, and you're going to look at the folder to mark it. So it's just a mechanism, really. When you set a OneNote page as an assignment, which you do by pressing the attach button when you set an assignment, it means that the pupil goes into assignments, clicks somewhere, and then they get immediately taken to the right place in their folder. They don't have to find it. They don't get distracted by what they did last week or the mark that you might have put in the see me style comment you put at the bottom. And this also follows through to marking. So you, when everything is handed in, you go and click on the assignment and the kids' work just comes up one after the other, which is really powerful. You don't have to take it all in and make sure it's in the right pile. And that makes your marking potentially much quicker, because you're taking away all of the admin side of it, all of the putting everything in the right piles, making sure you've got the work in. If you're in class notebook, if the pupil's doing the work in class notebook, I should say, either they've done the work and it's there, or they haven't done the work and it's not there. There's no possibility for them to have forgotten to bring it in, forgotten to bring it to you, forgotten to stick it in their book, their dog ate it. All those sorts of things disappear. It's either there or it isn't. If it's not there, they haven't done it. Pretty simple. No excuses, no chasing. You can actually slim down the marking load even more, especially for kind of really sort of repetitive factual tests, things that are multiple choice or with a really short answer, by creating self-marking quizzes in Microsoft Forms. And we've run a few student surveys over at the college on Microsoft Forms, and it's really useful for data gathering and creating simple pie charts and bar charts and of the responses. But it can also, if you can put in the answer to a question, say being Mensa means table, if the answer is table, then it will mark it correct, and if they write mind, then they'll get it wrong, and they immediately find out their results, and you don't have to actually touch the marking at all, but you can. So if you have a little play with this, perhaps go into Forms, is forms.microsoft.com, go into Forms, and I'll show you later on how to import a paper or PDF quiz, new feature from July, or you can create a quiz. And perhaps a vocabulary test, or how do you spell esophagus test, or something like that. And you create the test and you put the answers in, and that means that it will mark itself. You can then set it as an assignment, and all of those marks go into assignments, into grades and insights, which I'll show you in a second. You can go back in and change the marks if they're wrong. Forms is not by any means perfect. So for example, here's my bugbear with Forms. If you've got a multiple choice question where there's select the 3 things which are true out of these 10, so there's 3 possible options, and you can get 1, 2 or 3 marks. If you get one of them but not the other 2, you get 1 out of 3, and so on. If they get them all right, it'll mark it as 3. If they get even 1 wrong, it'll mark it as 0. So you have to go in and adjust that yourself. But and that's faffy, I agree, but it's still much better than having to mark all of it yourself. So it's workload reduction from that point of view. It also means that the pupils get their result immediately. Because it might not be right, because you might have to go in and change it, but they do get the result immediately, which especially for multiple choice tests where it's foolproof. It's really good. It doesn't have to be for studies. It could be for an exit ticket from a lesson, for example. You have to get these 3 multiple choice tests, questions right before you can leave, that kind of thing. Very much worth having an experiment with. There is an option if, for example, you're aware that another upper element group has done a particular assignment. You can just reuse that assignment, and you can do that from any team you're in. So if you're in another teacher's team, then you can reuse a task that they've set, which obviously really helpful. And you can reuse one from last year or the year before as well. This next feature I'm going to look at, they call it rubrics. It's quite American language in Microsoft Teams generally, but it's a mark scheme in grid format. Now you'll notice that my music example, this one is actually exactly the wrong way around. You get 8 points if you have poor technical control, but if you have convincing technical control, you only get 2. I've clearly got that wrong, but just suspend that for a moment. Quite often a pupil might get, in this case, 12, I think it is, marks out of 24, and they might say, why did I get that? And I've found that if I'm using a marking grid, particularly if it's for an external task like the A-level essays from the Edexcel GCSE, or from the Edexcel A-level rather, or the composition or performing at GCSE and A-level, I've actually got a mark scheme with subcategories there that I'm using to come to the number 12, but I haven't written out in long form that that's how I've done it. Actually, if you input those into Teams, you can then just click on 4, 6 and 2 and it'll add it up for 12. And then the pupil can, first of all, you don't have to do the maths yourself. Second of all, it just shows the pupil why they've got that mark and how you came to that decision without them having to ask you. There's a bit more transparency there. It's sharing the way that you got to that mark with the pupil. As well as copying assignments that you've already used with a class to a new class. You can also just set them to 2 classes in the first place. So let's say that Figures and Ruds English were going to do some kind of essay competition and you were all going to do it. Rather than every teacher going in and setting it, you could end up with just one teacher saying, I'll do that, make sure I'm in all of your class teams, and then one teacher writes it in and one teacher presses go and all the pupils can see it. Great timetable. Talking of time, this is an interesting one, and it's one of my slight bugbears with assignments, is that we're moving really from Firefly with where that it's the date that is the important thing when a piece of work is due. So if you set a piece of work on Monday, it's due for Wednesday. But someone at Microsoft must have thought, well, but when on Wednesday is it due? And they came up with the idea that it should be due at 23:59, and that, rather annoyingly, is the default. I think it should be 9 o'clock in the morning. That would be helpful, but it's 23:59, and you can change that. So let's say that you're always going to expect studies from a particular class in before your Friday lesson. Your Friday lesson starts at 2 o'clock. Then you set, say, 1 o'clock as the due time, and then everybody's clear about how it is. It also means that if you're setting revision as a task, that you can conclude that at the time that the test is going to be taken, which is nice and neat. You can just leave it at 23:59, but for those of us who find that annoying, it doesn't quite fit into my system, you know, that is changeable. But where Teams becomes really powerful when you're using assignments, especially if you're using it through OneNote, is when you're marking. So anything that is digitally submitted in Teams, which includes being attached to the OneNote page you attached in the first place, is available to mark in Teams. Bearing in mind, you can put a PowerPoint file into OneNote. You can put a Word document. A pupil could write something out on lined paper and scan it into OneNote, and you can still mark it digitally. And I'll just draw your attention to this over here, the top right image here. You can actually decide not to show the students' names as you mark it, which is really powerful, I think. It eliminates bias as much as you possibly can in this circumstance, really. It also shuffles the order of the students. It's not just in alphabetical order. And throughout assignments, there's an option to see what the student is seeing. So quite a lot of the time, if you click on the ellipsis, I'm sorry to have explained ellipsis. I just got asked so many times, I thought it was embarrassing, but there we go. Ellipsis. You find that there's an option to see it as the student would see it. And this is an example here of what a student would see. If they've attached some work, it would say it here where it says none. It tells them when it's due. This is a real piece of work, actually. It tells them when it's due, what it's marked out of, the rubric if there is one. And that's what they see. And you can see there that they can actually go back and look at the work that they've done as well. That's a place for them to find that work. Obviously, it'll be in their class notebook if it's if it's been done there. So all of that generates a huge amount of data. Now, probably the vast majority of us are already happy with the amount and mode of data that we have and don't want another mark, but we're going to have to say assignments and grades and insights is not a solution to, it's not a great mark book. The way in which it works is quite clunky and, dare I say it, quite American, with the idea being that you will take a class for a semester and you will get a grade for that class, rather than it being about the subject across the whole year with multiple topics. So it's not quite Briticized, if that's a word, and it's not quite ready even for America, I would say. But assignments generates data. You might as well have a look at it. And you also need to bear in mind that the pupils can see it as well. If you mark something in assignments, the pupils can see what mark they got immediately. If you choose it to, you can wait and release them all at the end. But when you've marked it and you've released it to the pupil can see it and can see the data, and it's worth knowing what it is that's stored there. So when you click on assignments and then insights in a class team, which if you do now, you'll see nothing because we haven't set any assignments yet. But here's an example. This is actually from the Microsoft website. This is their example from when they launched this in July. So you can tell that because they've actually misspelled assignments, which is quite special. This happens quite a lot with Microsoft. Bizarrely, the number of times I've been on Teams calls with people who work at Microsoft and the Teams call has dropped out is just bizarre. But by the time it gets to us, it normally does work. So you can see up here at the top, it shows recent class performance compared to the rest of the year, and you decide what that is, what the horizon for that is. You can say you're comparing the last 28 days to the whole year, or the past 7 days to the whole year, or whatever it is. You set those dates. It's got all the 7 tasks they've done there in that image, and you can see that all students have looked at these first 5, but 2 have not looked at Macbeth and 5 have not looked at Othello. Okay, so you're starting to find out things about not just the work that has been set, but when they're doing it and whether they've done it the night before. And that's something which Microsoft are starting to make a bit more powerful, and they're planning to make more powerful by about October, November, where you'll be able to see when pupils looked at which resource. So when a pupil said, oh, well, I looked at it on Monday, but I didn't get to do it until Thursday, you can say, well, you didn't look at it on Monday, actually. And it just enables a few conversations. Again, might not be something that fits into your practice, but it's something that's at least possible you need to know about. Another thing you can do in assignments when you're marking is you can return pupils' work if it's unsatisfactory. So rather than waiting for the lesson, handing their book back to them, you just press a button, go, it's not good enough, do it again for the following reasons, send them a message. And actually, if they've handed it in before the deadline, they might be able to even actually do it to the proper standard before the deadline still. This column, turned in, another Americanism, it shows that everyone's up to date up until the 25th of August. Remarkably, there's still a few missing Othello and Macbeth, but basically everyone's handed in most things. And it also shows you your workload. So you can see that this teacher hasn't started marking Othello and Macbeth yet. And that one returned Comedy of Errors is still waiting to be marked. Now this is where the American idea of it being a class rather than a subject has influenced the way that they prepare the data, but it's worth knowing that this data is here in case it is useful rather than ignoring it in case it isn't. But if your data is comparable from assignment to assignment, then actually there are some graphs that might be helpful. There's a distribution. This one, they've managed to make their fake data almost a normal distribution, slightly sort of biased towards the top end. But you can also see that Crystal McKinney, I haven't blurred her out because she's a name made up by Microsoft, is slightly above the average for the class here. That's her line. Then she dips below the average for the class on this one assignment here, and then goes back above it again. Now, This might not be something that you use in a sort of an absolute strict way, but it might be something you glance at occasionally, just to see if it's bringing you any interesting insights. Like if Crystal had taken a bigger dip here and it had continued, we might be saying, right, well, we need to perhaps stage a pastoral intervention or at least investigation into what's happening there, because there's clearly an issue that's happened somewhere between the 4th and 11th of September with Crystal. That's it from assignments. Now, the one thing I would say about assignments is that you can't sort of sit and learn everything about it and then go away and do it perfectly. You have to go and practice it. It's like a musical instrument. Go and have a look, see how it works. Where it's not like a musical instrument is that it's not that difficult. It is still fundamentally a mechanism for telling pupils what work they have to do and enabling them to get it to you. It's just all in one place. It's like you being stood at your pigeonhole, ready to receive the essay 24/7 for a week, waiting for pupils to come and ask you to tell them again what the essay was and to show you that YouTube video which illustrated the beginning of the novel or whatever it might be. It's kind of part of the always accessible kind of agenda of 21st century life. So we're going to explore just a couple of more ideas now that I've come across over the last few weeks. And the idea of this is partly, just to give you an insight into where we are at the college again, is that the very beginning of the pandemic, when I started showing people how to use EdTech tools, it was very much me saying, click here, do this, it's going to break if you don't do this. And that is because Teams was very fragile and Microsoft were really not prepared for literally half the world to start using it. There were ways you could launch a lesson which would mean that it didn't launch. It was just not quite ready for mass use by people who hadn't been trained. What I'm trying to reshape our experience of EdTech training to over at the college is more saying, here are some good ideas, here are the tools that we're giving you to do to put those ideas into practice. Go away and experiment, come back and throw things at me, possibly literally, if you need help with it. And so there's my slogan for the day. Excellent practice is not top down. Not that I'm at the top, I have to say, not middle down perhaps, but I'm not going to say this is what you should do because this is amazing. This is me saying, here are some ideas. Would it work for you? Would it make your teaching excellent? So just 4 things. 1, forms quizzes can now be timed. So I've mentioned forms quizzes before. If you want somebody to do something in a timed slot, you can now set a forms quiz to be, say, 20 minutes and it times out at the end and doesn't let them do it again. Brilliant. Where that might be valuable is, for those of you with boarding duties, you may have spotted this. I don't know if it happens at SMH as well at the college, but pupils will spend maybe 45 minutes or 50 minutes doing something that really should take them 20 because they want to get it right. It's like, that's not necessarily the thing which is being tested. It might be, in which case don't use a timer, but sometimes it is helpful. Also in forms, and I'll show you the YouTube link for that later. There's a QR code in a minute, but also I'll put the link in the description. That's what people do when you point in the description underneath me. And you can import those quizzes to forms. It doesn't import the answers, so you have to put the answers in yourself, but at least most of the typing is done for you. It can be a bit sensitive. It's kind of experimental at the minute. In your class team, there's now a home page option, and you can edit that and put your own welcome message in. By default, it shows on the right-hand side some of the latest files that have been put into the team, and on the left-hand side, it shows the latest assignments that are due and overdue. But you can put all sorts of things there. You put a welcome video in, you could have text, you can have links to useful websites. Very useful new sort of feature in Teams. And the final one, if there are already any platforms you're using, it's worth just looking at their help pages or their frequently asked questions, or even giving them a ring or an email and asking how far they can integrate with Teams. There's a couple of music platforms that I use, and one, I have to every year create the accounts for the kids manually and tell them what their passwords are. But for another one, it's now logging on through Teams. So their pupils click log on with Microsoft, similarly to how we do with iSAMS. When you get in there, any of the quizzes that are in that online resource that I've got, the tasks can be set in Teams, and the marks actually carry through to Teams. So if a pupil gets 100% there, I see that in Teams without having to log into the separate app to see it, which is really powerful. My Maths, I know, has some integration by way of example. There may be other pieces of software that you have. See how far they will integrate. It may be the thing that makes it worth really investing some time in it for your department. You are not alone. We are not alone. This is a huge growth area for education. Microsoft have recently changed the way that they do all of their training offer. So those of you who were here in March 2020 probably became a Microsoft Innovative Educator. That badge is now gone. You can still be an MIE expert, but not an MIE. And they're calling it just Microsoft Educator. And that 5.5 hour course looks like it's really worth doing. It takes you through all of the things that you really need, the real basics that you need to be able to start doing some quite cool stuff. There's also going to be an advanced educator course that's going to be launched in October. I don't know what's on that. And they also have standalone courses. So there's like an hour-long course on how to organize OneNote, an hour-long course on how to use PowerPoint Recorder. But at this time, when we're looking at perhaps appraisal and CPD that's going to be required in the next year, it's worth bearing that in mind. But just for more day-to-day stuff, there's also 2 great YouTube accounts that I would recommend you go and subscribe to. The first one is Mike Tholfsen. He is a product manager for Microsoft Education, and every time there's a change to the way that Teams or assignments or forms or Excel features that might be useful in education, every time there's a change, he gets a video out and shows you how to do it. It's really powerful. Kevin Stratford was also a Microsoft product manager, but not on the education side. And he just finds a piece of software and comes up with something that not everybody might know about how to use it. His latest video was how to pin apps that you use regularly to your taskbar at the bottom of your screen. Brilliant. Dead easy. Something that many of us will just know how to do, but not everybody. It's a 50-second video, and he just put it out today, and that's it. And he does a lot of those, and there's a lot more general things. So whereas Mike is looking particularly at how to use things in education, Kevin's is more about general stuff, and there's a bit of image editing and video editing and that sort of thing in there as well. So I'll just move myself into the middle here. If you've got your phone, there are 4 things for you to look at on these QR codes. I'll also put the links in the description down below. I do like doing that pointing thing. This QR code is just a quick calming playlist that I put together. You might like to have in the car on the way home or in your classroom this afternoon. Will help you relax. Mike Tholfsen's YouTube is there. Kevin Stratford's YouTube video account is there. And then there is a quick video here on how to import paper and PDF quizzes into forms, just to give you a flavour of how that works. Thank you very much for listening. It's been a pleasure to be with you both physically and digitally today. And if you do have any queries about how this works, I know you have lots of expertise in the building at SMH, but if you do want to have a chat, do pop over to the college. I'm at your end of the college. I'm in the music basement. So I'm closer than anywhere else, and we'll put the coffee machine on and we can have a chat. Do have a wonderful term. I look forward to seeing you during it. Bye bye.